around the 7 deadly sins of incentive compensation. Before we get started, I want to make sure that everybody's kind of joined in successfully, and there's a couple ways to listen in. And one is you can use your telephone if you're dialed in, or you can use your mic and speakers on your computer. So hopefully everybody is already all set with that. Also, we like to make these sessions as interactive as possible because we feel like that makes it much more informative. So we'd love to have questions from you that we'll field towards the end of the webinar. So if you want to, just go to the questions screen in your GoToWebinar and fill it in, and we will try to address any and all questions during the session today. If we're not able to get to it during the session, we will follow up with you and get you an answer. Hopefully that helps you out. And then lastly, lots of folks ask, you know, are we recording this? And we are, and we're going to record it and send it out to everybody who registered. So if you did, don't worry, you will get the recording today out in the next day or two. So again, thank you for joining us. My name is Jim Chittister, and I'm the product marketing leader here at Xactly. And I will take you through the webinar today and hopefully give you some information that helps you, as well as get some feedback from you and ask you questions that, yeah, okay, so hold on a second. We're having some hopefully people are seeing people that can see my screen, and hopefully it's working for you. If not, I'll just keep going, and hopefully it will show through, and hopefully everybody's seeing it. Actually, I just figured out the problem, so we're good now. Sorry about that. So good thing we figured that one out before we started. But anyway, again, my name is Jim Chittister, and I will take you through the webinar today of our 7 deadly sins of incentive compensation. And first, I want to start off kind of to set the context of incentive compensation and what you may or may not know about the size of the challenge here. Typically, if you look at the average for companies that use incentive compensation as a vehicle to drive company performance, it's in the neighborhood of between 12 to 15% of their operating revenues. So it is a big investment, and we wanted to kind of just show you contextually, like, compare the amount of money spent on incentive comp or sales compensation in the United States. It's about 3 times the size of what we spend on advertising in the United States every year, or in North America, sorry. So what that tells us is, if you think about it, when a company spends marketing dollars on things like ads, or if you've ever done a pay-per-click on the web, those are money being spent, and that money is really, really thoroughly analyzed and evaluated on a regular basis. Yet we find that even though the incentive compensation is a significantly larger investment, there's not a lot of attention paid to it, either on the just managing the process standpoint, as well as analyzing and figuring out if that significant investment is paying off for you. So hopefully what we'll show you today is, one, just some things to think about when you are managing your incentive comp, as well as building the right things to make what the ultimate goal is to have your incentive compensation drive particular behaviors so that you achieve your company goals, because that is the whole reason why you're making this significant investment in the first place. So if your company is spending money on incentive compensation to drive certain behaviors, and we believe that it works to do that, then you're trying to drive company goals. Well, the whole essence of that investment is to hit those company goals and achieve those company goals. Yet we find, as we work with companies, there's some things that they can change to make that work, and that's where we want to kind of identify some of those, what we call the 7 deadly sins, for you, and we can take you through some solutions for that. But first, I want to talk a little bit about quota attainment and what this chart shows. And basically, we have lots of data that we look at here at Xactly to help us understand how performance is going in terms of companies and in terms of achieving the goals that companies set out to when they invest their incentive compensation. What you see here is what you wouldn't call a normal distribution curve. So what you see is, in the terms of who sales reps that hit their annual quotas, what you'll see is up to the point where there's about 100%, you see a climb, but then you see on the on the stretching it out, you see what we would call the rock stars. So they're achieving way above their quota. Now, why can't everybody do that? Well, we'll talk a little bit about that today, and what are some of the things that will help you build better plans? What are some of the things that will help you avoid mistakes? And what are some of the things that can, again, have that significant performance come out of that significant investment? So let's get down to it. So number one on the 7 deadly sins is what we just kind of set up here, which is poor alignment with business objectives. So again, the whole idea of making an incentive comp investment, and again, as you already saw, it's a pretty large chunk of money. And again, if you're investing, let's say on the average 15 or 10%, let's say 10% of your company's revenues, and you're a $100 million company, that's $10 million. That's a significant investment that you want to make sure pays off. And you want to make sure, obviously, that it's helping achieve certain goals. And, what we find is that quite often that because of a few reasons, let's say one, legacy, you've just always done it this way, or two, the process or the process of managing incentive comp makes it hard to put together and manage maybe some of the incentive compensation things that you want to build. So what we have found is, that the idea and the notion of, hey, you could have many different goals for your company. Well, let's say it's generating revenue, or you want to drive new customers, or you want to improve the profitability of the company, or you want to make sure that reps don't give a lot of discount, or you've got a new product launching and you want to make sure it's #1 in the market in the next 24 months. These can all be goals that you build incentive compensation around. So those can be the strategic goals. But then when you take that strategic goal, that company goal, and put it into the actual plan, sometimes it doesn't always deliver what you want. So again, as you're making your plan, you have to make sure that what you want to make sure of is that not only your plan is built around your strategic goals, but then how you build that plan and how you relate and communicate that plan to the people that are delivering on those results, whether it be generating more revenue or increasing profitability or growing a new product line or making sure that the reps aren't doing out-of-line discounts. You want to make sure that as you manage that process and as you build that process out, that the devil's in the details in terms of that actual plan. So we want to make sure that what we want to try and do is look at the components of that plan individually, of individuals' plans, and see if they're tying back. So make sure you map them back to the business objectives to make sure that they don't conflict. And the best way we see is the best way to do that is you want to make sure you get everybody in the room. If you can do it on a quarterly basis, that's great. And basically identify what the company goals are. You want to have product in the room. You want to have sales in the room. You want to have marketing in the room. You want to have maybe support in the room if customer success and customer retention is something that is valuable to you. But you want to make sure, one, that you're all in agreement on the goals, because you can sit, if the company goal is product management is launching a new product and they need to get traction, and there's no goal in the actual plan for reps to drive that product, however you define it or however you design it, then that new product is not going to get out there and be success, because as those sales reps go out there, if they're not focused on their behavior, which is driving a new product, and instead they're focusing on either improving margins because that's what you guys did last year, or generating new customers because that's what you guys did last quarter, then the new product is not going to be successful because the people who are out there supposed to sell it aren't incentivized to do it, and you're not driving that behavior. So again, it's important to have a really holistic view of what the company goals are. It's really important to make sure that as you build the plan out, that builds in those company goals. Because again, you've got a huge investment. You want to make sure that that investment and the actual individual plans that are going to drive, whether it be a rep or whether it be, we have companies that we work with, banks, tellers, you want them to do it, or truck drivers. We have many different people executing those plans to make sure that they deliver on those company goals. So you want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard, and then you want to make sure that the devil's in the details of the plan. You have to make sure that if you're going to get new products out there, that the reps or whoever it is getting incentivized has that as and has visibility to that being one of their goals that they're going to target. That being said, the second deadly sin is excessive plan components, and we see this quite a bit. So again, now we've talked about making sure that everybody's on the same page, and you may have multiple goals and objectives for the company, but you want to make sure that you minimize the number of components to have effectiveness. Now, we've had theories, and there's been experts in the compensation field have theories over the years saying, 3 to 4 is going to be the right number to deliver, and mainly the reason being is because you can't have somebody focused on multiple components, because they're certainly not, at some point they're going to start diluting their efforts against one or the other, and they're just not going to remember one or the other. So you've got to have those reps focused and engaged on specific goals, or again, whether it be a bank teller or a truck driver, you want to have them focused on just a few powerful goals that help drive your performance. And like I said, theoretically, that was what people believed over the years. Well, we actually have data that shows that the most successful comp plans have three variables or 3 components to it. So, and now the other thing you want to make sure is that you're not building components in there to take the place of a manager. And sometimes we see this as well. So, for example, the other thing is you don't want to have components in there that measure activity and don't really drive a result. So, for example, if you want somebody to basically drive a certain number of revenue, but then you start measuring number of phone calls, that's the activity that's not necessarily driving the goal, and it's diluting the number of, you're adding on to the number of components that you may be asking your rep to focus on. So so just be careful that as you build out your plans, that you make sure that you keep your measures for each of those plans to a minimum. You can have multiple plans for different roles, but make sure that you do a couple things. Keep those plans or keep those components to a minimum, so that you're keeping your reps focused on the goals that they're targeting, and you're aligning those with the company objectives. And if you need to make different plans for different types of goals, that's fine, but just make sure that each person who's targeted behind some type of incentive compensation is focused on a few variables, and you don't want to have those variables replace a manager's direction. So if you need help in getting to those goals, then that's a manager's job. Don't have the add components to replace the manager to make sure that the rep is doing their job properly. Really focus on the rep's measurements are based on what those company objectives are trying to hit. The third deadly sin that we run into and that you want to make sure you try to avoid is what we call oversharing the wealth. And simply put, what that means is spreading the peanut butter of a deal over, or a successful completion of a business transaction over many people, some of which had barely anything to do with it. Now, how you start to get into these situations is because what you start to do is, you start to think about, okay, who is involved in this transaction, or who is involved in closing this deal? And you say, John from professional services was in this, or Mary from sales engineering was in this, or even we have a account development representative in it. And that you might have a bunch of people in it, and you may wind up taking something that was supposed to be an incentive and turn it into a reward. And by that we mean, somebody doesn't even know that they were part of this deal, but they wind up with some money in their checking account that paid them. So first of all, they weren't incentivized to do anything about it in the first place, and then you rewarded them instead of incentivizing them. And as a result, what you do is kind of dilute the effectiveness or the impact of that incentive, and you make it a reward. And now the difference between an incentive and a reward is an incentive will basically get me to go and get up early and go drive to close a deal. It will get me to stay late. It will get me to strategize around how can I be successful in closing this deal. A reward is more, hey, we were successful and we want to give you some recognition. So there's nothing wrong with rewards, and obviously it's a very helpful way of motivating and inspiring your workforce at certain times. But incentives are around, let me drive the business forward and be focused on driving that business forward. Now, to give you an example of what we've seen with some of the data that we see, we have actually seen people credited, one deal credited for 161 people. 161 people got a bonus, or an incentive off a closed deal, which I can't even imagine what the 161st person did on that deal. May not even know that it actually happened or existed. So you want to make sure that your incentives are delivering what they're supposed to do. Is incent the people who are making those things happen properly. Now, if you need to reward people separately for something different, that's awesome, and you should do that. We do it here. And that, again, it's a great way to motivate and energize your overall team to success. But you want to make sure that if they had nothing to do with that deal, then they probably shouldn't be participating in that. And if their contribution isn't clear, again, remember, if you look back at that original slide that I showed, there's incentives to drive behavior. Well, if I'm 161 person on this deal and I get 3 cents on I have no idea what I did. I have no idea why I got it, and I'm not really inspired or incented to do it again. So you want to make sure that you're linking performance to that incentive compensation. And what we say is, about 75% of companies pay 5 people on a typical deal. And again, it depends on what your business is. So if you're, let's say, in a SaaS or software business where you not only have an account development rep generating some type of lead for your sales team, and then you obviously have your sales rep, and then you have, let's say, a solutions consultant, or some people call it a sales engineer, to help really demonstrate the product to that prospect. And then you have, let's say, a sales manager involved in that. You're talking, you're at 4, and you're 4 or 5. That's, 75% pay 5 people on a typical deal. Those people will see how they'll see and understand how their contribution led to that deal. They'll be inspired or motivated to have their behavior drive a successful conclusion on that. And you want those deals to drive specific actions. And if you have 5 people in there, and those 5 people really have unique roles. So the account development rep had the role of getting the lead in. You had the sales representative really fostering and nurturing and building the lead into a prospect, into an opportunity. You had the solutions consultant or the sales engineer using their technical knowledge to take the prospect through the deal or through the product, so it inspired them to turn that opportunity into a win for the company. And then you had hopefully a sales manager who's coaching the sales representatives how to strategize around their deals, how to strategize around making that deal happen. So those people all see what they did. They're incented to make that deal happen, and they're getting paid for it. So it really makes a lot of sense. Once you start spreading that peanut butter thin, you lose the impact of the incentive to driving the behavior to delivering the company goals, which we'll always come back to. And you'll have people getting paid when they really didn't need to. Doesn't mean don't give people, you'll basically change the whole meaning of the incentive. You want the incentive to incent and drive that certain behavior, and certainly want to have rewards to recognize and say thank you to people for contributing, but you want that separately. So you want to make sure that those incentive compensation investments are doing what they're supposed to do, and that's drive particular company goals, and don't turn them into rewards. Okay, yes, and let's get on to our next deadly sin, and that is demotivating measures. And yes, you actually can build in demotivating measures into your incentive compensation plan, so basically going the opposite direction of what you wanted to accomplish. So, and you have to keep your eye open for some of these things as you do them, and just sometimes they make business sense, sometimes they don't. So you kind of have to weigh that with your company objectives. But here are a few. We'll talk about a few of them that make it a little painful to achieve those objectives. The first one I want to talk about is what we call holds and releases. And if you don't know what that means, is basically, let's say a sales representative goes out, sells the deal closes, but you hold a certain portion of that deal or their payment on that deal for when either the customer either launches with the product, or they pay their first bill, or they reach some type of financial threshold, let's say, before you actually write a check to the rep. And the release is obviously the release part. So they're holding it until that threshold is achieved, and then the money is released to the rep once that threshold is achieved. Well, if you don't, if you are selling and you have no problem collecting on your on the accounts, and let's say you have 95, 100% collection, let's say, then what you don't want to do is, one, demotivate the rep by turning them into a collection agent. So their job is to go out there and sell. And if you're collecting on those sales, then why not make sure that when if that's not an issue, then make sure that you pay those reps on time. Don't hold it for a bill to be paid when what happens when getting paid is not actually an issue for the company. And again, that all goes back to tying to objectives. If you have an objective of making sure you get paid, then that may be something that you want to look at. But let's not try and turn reps into a collection agency and have them weary of being sale, and then totally disconnect the sale to their behavior, or the sale to their incentive, so that they kind of lose that behavior. Second is capped commissions. So let's say you cap the commissions at you only make 200%, and that's it. You go beyond that. Well, if a sales rep is really doing a great job and they're really delivering, and they get up to that point, then they're going to stop and slow down, even though they have the opportunity to sell more if they've achieved or hit that goal. And they're not going to slow down at 100, reaching at 200%. They're going to probably slow down before that. So what you want to do is continue to give them the opportunity to earn if it's going to help the company achieve the goals that it's setting out. Now, obviously, we're not saying, if you need some type of language built in there to make sure that there's some huge deal that really does damage to the company, we're not saying don't do that. But basically, if there's an opportunity for them to make more money and the company to make more money, then you should go ahead and do it. And then the other thing that we talk about is and we talk about this a lot, is the timing of the payments. So again, if you're trying to drive a certain behavior through your incentive compensation, you can't pay people, a month later, quarter later, because you will have lost the drive for that, and you won't connect the behavior with the payout for them. So what you want to make sure is that you pay as timely as possible as you can. So again, kind of drop the caps and make sure that you don't want to prevent the sales rep from being successful, especially if it's going to prevent the company from being more successful. You want to make sure that everybody wins. And again, always tie back to your objectives and your goals. Drop the holds. Again, if you are not having a problem collecting on your outstanding invoices, don't have the rep stop selling and have them make sure that they collect so they can get their payment out. It's frustrating for them, it demotivates them, and it stops them from selling. So again, the incentive compensation is here to drive some type of company goal. Don't have them turn into your collection agency, especially if you don't have a problem with that issue as a company in the first place. Again, tying back to your goals for the company. And then lastly, pay on time. Again, we've heard many examples of folks or companies who are going to pay a quarter later, or pay 6 weeks later. Make sure that both the process that you have to manage the incentive compensation, as well as just let's say the policy, is that you pay those reps as soon as you can, so that you're driving you're rewarding the behavior that you ask them to do in order to deliver those company goals. So again, drop the caps. Make sure that you don't turn the reps into collection agents on holds and releases, especially if you don't have a cash issue or cash collection issue. And then pay on time, so that you're driving the behaviors that you want, and then rewarding that so you continue to get that same type of behavior. Okay, let's move on now to the next one, which is deadly sin of incentive compensation, which is eroding profitability. So you might be saying, for us, you want to keep in mind what your company goals are, and you want to make sure, and I'm assuming a lot of companies are making sure that they stay profitable. So what you don't want to have happen, and again, this is, if you tie it back to how you manage the process or how you forecast what you might spend on accruals or as expenses for your incentive compensation, you always want to make sure that as you build that plan, you understand as you tier things up. So tier being like if you sell, just for an example, if you sell 100%, then you're going to get 2% of the deal. If you sell 120%, you're going to get 3% of the deal. If you sell 150%, then you're going to get 5% of the deal. That's just an example. And those things are called accelerators, and those are different tiers. So as you build out and model your plan, you want to make sure that you plan or make sure you have a contingency and understanding of what's going to happen if reps hit that certain level. Now, you can make an understanding and make sure that the reps hit a certain level for, excuse me, if they hit certain levels, then what's going to happen is, that, let's say you have high performing reps who hit those accelerators, yet you've built it so that the revenue doesn't have to generate as much to get that, and you start eating into margin. That you don't want to demotivate the tool of accelerators, but at the same time, you want to do what-if scenarios, make sure you understand what's going to be the impact of those accelerators on your bottom line, and make sure that you're keeping track and doing what-if scenarios and what-if statements to make sure that you keep track of that. So you really want to avoid those unpleasant surprises. There's been stories out there of companies who all of a sudden had to restate their earnings because all of a sudden one rep or two reps or three reps did really, really well. They hit their accelerators, but the accelerators were not built in a way that had the company making up for those accelerators with increased revenue. So you want to make sure you model out different scenarios, different budget scenarios that help you understand and make sure that you hit the performance levels and your profitability. If you want to put out a scenario of, what if a few high performers really hit that goal, because that could happen. And then what if a whole bunch of reps outperform their plans? Make sure that when you run those scenarios, you understand the potential impact to profitability so that, if you run it out and it doesn't look good, then you can just reconfigure that plan and make sure that it works not only for the rep, but again, for the company to drive those company goals. Okay, moving on to the next one is inability to measure success, and this is a key one. This really goes back to the one of the very first slides I showed, which is the $800 billion in investment. And I talked a little bit about how we spend significantly less in advertising in North America, but we really, and I'm being a marketer myself, we really analyze those dollars to the T so that we can understand and know where to invest our marketing dollars. And what we see is people don't necessarily analyze the results that they need to understand whether their comp plan is worked, and they kind of go off of intuition. So you don't want to go off of intuition. You want to have the data available and analyze it and review it and understand it so that you can make adjustments if needed, if you can do spiffs if needed, if you want to hit certain results in a certain short time frame. But what you really want to do is you want to make sure that you're not using your gut to say if something's working. Not intuition combined with data can be really helpful. So you want to make sure you understand information to understand if the incentive comp investment that you're making is working for you. So don't just use your intuition, don't use your gut. And certainly, again, it's a significant investments that you're making. And you want to, again, if you're a $100 million company investing $10 to $15 million in incentive compensation, then you want to really make sure that incentive comp plan is working for you and achieving the goals you want. So again, kind of use benchmarks derived from hard data to measure performance. Use your, benchmark against an aggregate group, benchmark against industry, benchmark against your company goals. So make sure you understand and review that. We actually, just from conversations, we've found that a lot of companies, some of them, maybe over half, about 60 to 70% can really not even look at their analytics or their incentive comp only once a year at the annual planning phase. So make sure you're not one of those who only looks at the data annually. Look at it on however you're paying it out, whether it be monthly or quarterly. The shorter time frame, the better. Be able to have that information available to you so you can see that. Okay, and the last deadly sin that we're going to go through today before we get to questions is a lack of sales traceability to sales behavior. So again, the whole conversation started off with, we're making these incentive compensation investments to drive a certain behavior to achieve company goals. The reps are trying to achieve their goals as well. So you want to make sure that you have a solid foundation of data so that the reps know what they're doing, how it's working, and if they need to adjust. So you've got a lot of companies use spreadsheets to manage their incentive compensation process, and that information and data will be all over the place. And you want to make sure that a couple things can happen. One is, reps really want to know, or the people who are being incentivized want to know, okay, I got this payment, why did I get it? Well, you did these 3 things and you performed at that certain level. They also want to know, how am I doing towards it? So at any moment in time, can I understand if I'm getting, what I'm getting paid for? And then 3 is, I've got my commission check or I've got my incentive check. Can I look back and see how it made sense? Did it make sense to me? So use that information and that availability of information so that not only can the rep see how they're doing to change their behavior if they need to, but also understand how they performed, and then understand, more importantly, that check that showed up for $1,753 in my bank account, I know how I got it. I got it from these 3 deals, and they paid these percentages. I hit this accelerator on this one deal, which bumped it up another $50 or another $100. So I know as a rep, I did these certain things, and this is why I got my $1,753. On top of that, you want finance to be able to say, I need to be able to look back and go, okay, I'm writing all these checks to payroll. I want to be able to audit and understand through data why we're writing those checks. I want to be able to say, how come we're spending, X million dollars on incentive compensation, and where is it coming from? What are the things that are driving it? So both on the sales side, when you're talking to reps and managers, to understand, 1, how are they doing within the time period that they're trying to perform so that they can make adjustments. 2, after they get paid out, understand, hey, I did these 3 or 4 things, and my plan was built this way, so I got to see how I was paid, and that should result in this dollar amount. What you don't want is, mistrust between the sales and finance teams, because that causes a lot of problems, and you'll wind up getting reps who are keeping track themselves instead of selling. And then obviously you have you always can have butting heads with sales and finance sometimes on that. And then on the finance side, you want to make sure when you're writing your payroll checks and you're writing those commission checks that you understand and have that auditability around that, and use data to make sure that you are getting the accuracy around the payments for those commissions, so that everybody's happy. The rep's happy in terms of understanding why they got paid and what they need to do to make more money, and the finance team is happy because they've quickly and accurately identified what checks should be written and what drove that check to be written. So again, kind of just the atonement there is ensure that anyone who earns incentive compensation can look back and say, here's how I made my money. That's what we just went over, is here's how I made my money, and they can understand what they did to make that money. So we've talked a lot about those sins and what they, again, let me summarize by saying the whole idea of an incentive compensation investment is that you're trying to drive you're ultimately trying to get to company goals, whether that be profitability, revenue growth, new product launch and success, or profitability, or making sure that reps don't use discounts, or whatever it is. And to do that, you're investing in incentives that you want to drive a certain behavior. And if you look at some of the mistakes of the past and people have made and try to avoid them, you will be successful. We believe you'll be successful at making your company more successful around those company goals by incenting right, by inspiring the right performance from folks, and from, excuse me, and making that investment pay off for you versus just having it be kind of a black hole out there that you do because every company does. Really make that incentive compensation work for your company's goals and performance, as well as having the folks that are being incentivized by that understand why they're being incentivized by that, and then drive that right behavior. So with that, we'll go over a couple questions. First question I've got is, one question was, and let's see if I can try and paraphrase this. Somebody asked a question around the number of components. We already said, you know, shoot for 3, keep those components, the variable components, down. But the question was around, well, what if we have more than one variable that, or more than 4 or 5 variables that we want to collect? So, and that is, you may be running into a situation where you're trying to do more than one role. So for example, I would have a account development rep should have different goals and different plans than, let's say, a sales rep. So maybe maybe where you're getting into here is kind of having roles kind of come together. So if you have too many goals in one plan, make sure that you're driving the right behavior, and if maybe the right behavior is to make lead generation phone calls, maybe you need to set up a group that does that. So they're being compensated on the right thing, which is collecting and identifying great opportunities and prospects, and then you incentivize them for that. Versus having a sales rep be more responsible for taking that lead, driving the opportunity, and being successful in that. So just make sure that when you're building out those plans, that you stick to the very few components so that those people can stay focused on what they're supposed to be doing. And if you find that you have a lot of creep, a couple things to do is, one, make sure that you're really clear, like we talked about earlier, make sure you're clear on the company objectives, so those measurements are driving the company objectives. And 2, make sure that, let's say, that role, that makes sense for that role. So if you need account development rep, then great. If you need account development, if you need account development rep to do that, answer those questions or focus on those objectives, then let's do that. Another question I got here was around, again, I brought up towards the end, how often should you analyze? Now, for me in particular, I mean, I think we would love to analyze. You should analyze as much as possible to make sure you're on track. So if you're reviewing, let's say, quarterly or monthly, then you should analyze, or if you're paying out quarterly or monthly, you should really analyze on that basis. There's no set time frame, I guess. Always be aware of how your incentive comp is helping drive the performance of the folks that you have, and making sure that when you are making those investments, that you're understanding and analyzing that performance. And again, if you're waiting until annual time to do that, I certainly wouldn't recommend that. You should be analyzing this on a regular basis, really understanding, making sure if you're hitting that. Okay, let's see if I got another question here. Okay, one question we have is around automation. So we really didn't talk a lot about automation, and but it's certainly something that we believe that you should really focus on. It's one of the things that when you're incenting right, you should make sure. The question is really around how do you make automation work for the incentive compensation? Because when you're running incentive comp and you've got many different plans and many different variables, in terms of, let's say you have 3 or 4 different types of plans built together, you have 3 or 4 different tiers, the complexity of those plans, you have 4 or 5 different products, the complexity of those plans can get pretty nasty. So by automating, you can take a lot of that complexity out of the plans, and making sure, again, we talked about a few of those things. Bring the data and the visibility to the rep or to the team, so that that's one of the ways to atone for it is automating that process. So if you automate that process, then you will bring that visibility to the reps so they'll understand how they're doing. You'll also be able to, again, tie their performance to their behavior, and or tie their incentive to their behavior, and then result in the company objective being reached. And the thing you want to make sure of is that that you can scale as well, because a lot of you are probably growing companies, and you want to, if you have 10 reps and then all of a sudden you have 50 reps, the complexity of that process is going to get much worse. So you want to make sure. So by automating, I guess the long-winded answer is by automating that process, you help to atone for a lot of these sins as well. So with that, we're gonna wrap up. But for anybody whose questions we did not get to, we'll follow up with you in the next 24 to 48 hours. Probably if I don't get back to you, I'll have somebody on our sales team get back to you. And we appreciate you taking the time to listen today. Hopefully what we've been able to do is give you some ideas around, again, incenting right, and making sure that you try to avoid some of those pitfalls, some of those sins in developing, designing, and managing your incentive compensation process, so that with the ultimate goal of making sure that that incentive comp process is something that works for you and works for your company. And we would love to help you out in figuring those things out. So if you want to give us a call, there's our phone number there, or if you want to reach out to us at xactlycorp.com through the website, feel free to do so. Just want to mention too that there's a lot of ideas and thoughts in a book that our CEO, Christopher Cabrera, just put out called Game the Plan. You can find it on Amazon, but it really takes you through kind of a lot of the thinking and thoughts and philosophies around using incentive compensation, right, to inspire performance. So feel free to check that out as well. So again, thank you for taking your time, and we will send out the recorded webinar to you guys here in the next day or two, and hope to talk to you soon. All right?